Okay, imagine this for a second. You've got a really high-profile city official, right? Mayoral candidate. Big city.
New York City, no less.
Exactly. And suddenly he's arrested by masked federal agents.
Not just anywhere, but inside a federal courthouse.
It sounds like something straight out of a movie, doesn't it? A
Yeah.
political thriller, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. But this actually happened.
It did. So today we're doing a deep dive into this very real, very dramatic event, the arrest of New York City Comptroller Brad Lander.
Arrested by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents, ICE.
Right, ICE.
And our main source here is an excerpt from a CBS News piece, which is great because it pulls together several different viewpoints.
Often very conflicting viewpoints on this whole thing.
But definitely conflicting.
So our mission really is to unpack what went down. Look at those different stories.
The official version versus, what Lander and his supporters are saying.
And then think about the bigger picture. What does it mean for officials, for law enforcement?
For the rule of law itself here in the city.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
So the basic facts. It happened on a Tuesday. Brad Lander gets arrested inside federal immigration court, Lower Manhattan.
Right there at 26 Federal Plaza.
He's held for a few hours, but then Governor Hochul later said the charges were dropped same day.
Pretty quick turnaround, but still, the arrest itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A sitting city official.
So the initial word from DHS, the Department of Homeland Security.
Their spokesperson basically said Lander was arrested for, quote, assaulting law enforcement and impeding a federal officer.
Which sounds, that sounds really serious. Assaulting an officer.
Extremely serious. But, okay, what was he even doing there? Why was the city comptroller hanging out in immigration court?
That's a key question, isn't it?
According to the reporting, he'd actually been going there for several weeks.
Observing the hearings, yeah.
And according to him, also trying to, escort people out.
To try and stop them from getting arrested by ICE right outside the courtroom door?
So he was actively involved, not just watching.
He was. And his campaign spokesperson, Dora Pekak, she gave a specific account of the moment.
What did she say?
She said, while escorting a defendant out of immigration court, Brad was taken by masked agents and detained by ICE.
And the person he was with, the defendant, was named Edgardo.
Right. So he was physically trying to help this specific person, Edgardo.
And there's video, right? Someone on his staff filmed it.
Yeah, there's footage showing him actually being handcuffed inside the courthouse.
And you can hear him protesting.
You can. He's saying something like, you don't have the authority to arrest U.S. citizens asking for a judicial warrant.
Okay, so he's specifically challenging their legal basis right there. A judicial warrant, meaning from a judge.
Exactly. He's arguing they don't have the proper paperwork, essentially, to arrest him, a U.S. citizen, in that way.
Now, what about the official side, the prosecutors?
Well, the Southern District of New York, that's the federal prosecutor's office, they put out a statement saying they're still investigating. And they stressed the importance of, quote, the safety and security of official proceedings, government officials, law enforcement officers, and all members of the public.
So kind of a standard safety and security line, but also a reminder.
Right. And they pointed out that, yeah, federal law does prohibit assaulting law enforcement and obstructing proceedings. They're laying down the legal framework they operate under.
Okay. So you have the arrest, the claim of assault, Lander's protest about warrants.
It sets up a real clash.
And here's where it gets really interesting, because the narratives just completely diverge.
Absolutely. You have the DHS spokesperson, Tricia McLaughlin, coming up very strongly.
What was her take?
She mentioned this statistic, a supposed 413% increase in assaults against ICE officers.
Wow, 413%. That's huge. Does the source say over what period?
The article doesn't specify the time frame or details on the metric, but it's clearly meant to frame the context as dangerous for their officers.
Okay, so setting that stage.
And then she said, it is wrong that politicians seeking higher office undermine law enforcement's safety to get a viral moment. Pretty pointed.
Directly accusing Lander of doing it for attention.
Seems like it. And then she added, no one is above the law, and if you lay a hand on a law enforcement officer, you will face consequences.
So a very clear, don't mess with us message, backed by that assault statistic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then you flip to Lander's side.
Right. After he gets out, what does he say?
Well, he starts with a little joke, actually. I'm happy to report I am just fine. I lost a button.
Trying to lighten the mood, maybe?
Maybe, initially. But then he gets very serious. He compares his situation.
Hmm.
He's out, he has lawyers, he has rights.
Due process.
Right. He compares that to Edgardo, the man he was escorting.
Who is still in icy detention.
Still detained, probably no lawyer, and, in Lander's words, stripped of his due process rights.
That's a stark contrast he's drawing.
It is. And then Lander says, quote, "The rule of law is not fine, and our constitutional democracy is not fine."
Whoa. So he's framing his arrest not just as a personal inconvenience, but as a symptom of something much bigger.
Much bigger. He basically argues that if a public official trying to observe due process can be arrested like that, without a clear warrant, then the whole system is shaky.
And he connects it to politics.
He does. He mentions he'd helped other families before who were scared of being detained. 4 families, apparently.
Okay.
And he explicitly links his arrest to Donald Trump, saying Trump is coming for New York City, trying to ratchet up fear. He calls it creeping authoritarianism.
Strong words. Authoritarianism.
Very strong. He said it was important for him to stand up for the rule of law and due process in New York City. So he sees it as taking a stand.
And this isn't the first time a politician has been arrested recently in these kinds of situations, is it?
No, the source mentions Senator Alex Padilla in California at a DHS press conference.
And Mayor Ross Baraka in Newark.
Right, outside an IC facility.
Yep.
So Lander sees a pattern here.
He thinks it's coordinated.
He suggests it is. He points to Attorney General Pam Bondi, saying she's basically signaled a strategy.
Which is?
They're going after the leaders of Democratic cities with a political intention of provoking conflict. That's his interpretation.
So a deliberate attempt to create clashes in cities led by Democrats.
That's how he frames it. A calculated political move.
Okay, so you've got these clashing narratives, the political dimension. How did other officials in New York react? Must have caused quite a stir.
Oh, definitely. The reactions were strong and pretty swift.
Like who? What did they say?
Governor Hochul, for instance. She called it a sorry day for New York and our country. Said the video was shocking.
And she added that line, "This is New York, a land of immigrants."
Yeah, really emphasizing the city's identity.
Right.
And Donna Lieberman from the NYCLU.
An ACLU, yeah. What was their take?
She called it a stunning abuse of power, a threat to our democracy, and dangerous intimidation. Really strong condemnation.
And local politicians, too. City council.
Councilmember Alex Eveles called it an abomination. Talked about the violence of arresting a sitting official who was just there to bear witness.
Interesting phrase, bear witness.
It frames his presence in a particular way, doesn't it? Not interfering, but observing.
Now, what about Mayor Adams? He's the mayor. Lander's technically part of his administration, though elected separately.
Right. His office put out a statement, but it was different.
How so?
It focused more broadly on ensuring all New Yorkers, regardless of status, feel safe using city resources.
Okay.
Making sure people don't hide in the shadows, rather than focusing specifically on, quote, making the incident about Brad Lander.
So a more general statement about immigrant safety, less of a direct defense or condemnation related to Lander himself. That's quite nuanced positioning.
It is. Definitely a different emphasis compared to Hochul or the ACLU.
And Lander's wife was there, Meg Barnett. She's an attorney, right?
Yes, she is. And she was present during the arrest. She gave her own account.
What did she see?
She said she'd been moved and horrified by stories Lander had told her before about the court. And then seeing it herself, she said, "What I saw today was not the rule of law. That was not due process."
Echoing Lander's own words there.
Exactly. She described asking for warrants, linking arms with Edgardo.
Physically trying to protect him.
Yes. And she mentioned the agents wore uniforms, but also masks. And it was unclear what agency they were from. They wouldn't give names or badge numbers, she said.
Wow. Masks, no names, no badge numbers, inside a federal courthouse. That paints a picture.
It certainly adds to the sense of confusion and, well, intimidation that Lander's side is describing.
What about someone like Jermaine Williams, the public advocate, another citywide official?
He thanked Lander for being present and to witness what is happening, said the situation is simply unacceptable.
So support there. Any other reactions mentioned?
There was a quote from Rabbi Ellen Lippman, sort of a mix of emotions. She said she felt pride in Lander, but also shame. Shame as an American or New Yorker about the situation, but then also pride in the uprising of New Yorkers responding to it.
Interesting. Pride, shame, pride again. Captures the complexity, maybe?
I think so. It shows how deeply it resonated.
So what does this all mean? We have the arrest, the politics, the reactions, But you mentioned Lander was there because of practices he'd been observing.
Right. This incident didn't happen in a vacuum. It seems to highlight these underlying issues, these allegations about how things work in that immigration court.
What are those allegations specifically? What were they observing?
Meg Barnett, Lander's wife, described a process. People might be told their cases dismissed.
Okay, which sounds good. Case dismissed. You're free to go.
Exactly what you'd think. But according to her account, it actually means they are now, quote, subject to immediate removal when you leave the courtroom.
Wait, what? So dismissed means you're being deported?
Essentially, yes. It clears the way for IC to pick them up immediately. And she said IC agents are often lining the hallway, right outside.
And people aren't told this.
She specifically says this is not explained to people. They hear dismissed, think it's good news, and walk right out into the arms of ICE.
That sounds incredibly deceptive, if true.
Jermaine Williams used even stronger language.
The public advocate, what did he say?
He said, they are kidnapping our neighbors off of the street. They are bamboozling them. They are tricking them to tell them to come here.
Wow, kidnapping, bamboozling.
Yeah, he continues. And when they hear the court news, they believe something good has happened. And then they're faced with people in fatigues, with masks on their faces, and they're taken, having not understood even what just happened legally and what their recourse is.
So utter confusion, maybe false hope, leading directly to detention.
That's the picture they paint. And the source mentions this wasn't just Edgardo. They cite prior arrests, like a Bronx high school student named Dylan, apparently happening in a similar way.
So Lander wasn't just protesting his own arrest, he was trying to intervene in this larger pattern he saw.
That seems to be the core of his argument, yes. The arrest was maybe the flashpoint, but the underlying issue was this alleged practice in the court.
Okay, so this deep dive, it's really laid out a complicated situation. You've got this dramatic arrest, a city official in handcuffs.
Then these completely different stories. Law enforcement saying assault, obstruction, upholding the law.
Lander and his supporters saying it was an abuse of power, politically motivated, and part of a pattern of questionable ICE tactics and disregard for due process.
And it shines a light on these really troubling allegations about what happens inside immigration court, how terms like dismissed might be used.
It definitely paints a complex and, yeah, unsettling picture.
It really does. And it leaves you thinking, doesn't it? In this time where we have so much information, but it's often contradictory, what's the role of a public official?
Do they have a responsibility to physically show up, to bear witness, like Councilmember Avalez said, especially when legal processes seem opaque?
And on the flip side, what responsibility do enforcement agencies have for transparency, for ensuring people truly understand their rights and the court's decisions, especially when dealing with, really vulnerable people?
How do these things balance? Or maybe they don't balance easily at all.
And how does all this tension affect public trust?
Yeah.
Trust in city government, trust in federal agencies, trust in the courts themselves. It raises some fundamental questions.
So after hearing all this, thinking about the arrests, the conflicting stories, the alleged court practices, what stands out to you?